You're listening to Speaking Sidemount, the podcast where we talk all things sidemount diving, from equipment, skills, techniques, and sidemount diving expeditions to interviews with some of the world's top sidemount divers. Whether you're new to sidemount, been sidemount diving for years, or just want to know more, this is the place for all things sidemount. I'm your host, Steve Davis. Let's get wet.
Hey, welcome back to Speaking Sidemount. I'm Steve Davis. This episode is sponsored by X-Deep and Shearwater Research, and I am extremely grateful to both for their support of this podcast. I've dived the X-Deep Stealth and Shearwater computers for over 6 years, and beyond their support of me, I can truly say they are absolute leaders in terms of their product, quality and support, and worthy of your consideration the next time you're purchasing gear. Now, when I started my journey as a new sidemount and cave diver over 6 years ago, I had some very specific reasons for choosing this path. I'd been heavily influenced by the online video of Steve Bogarts and Steve Martin in particular, and as a fellow Steve, I thought it only fitting that I explore sidemount diving. All kidding aside, I was taken by the astounding skill level of both of them. Balanced, stable, in trim, and able to take this equipment platform of sidemount and its skill sets and apply them to one of, if not the, most challenging environment in diving, cave diving. I wanted that skill set, and I was able to use all of the benefits of sidemount diving over backmount to justify what was then a very different direction to all of my dive friends. Now, the past 6 years have seen me build on my initial training with Jason Renault in Mexico. I completed full cave, advanced rec and trimix training, all in sidemount, and in doing this, I've deliberately sought out the very best instructors I could find and traveled the world to extend my own skills as an open circuit sidemount diver and instructor. About a year ago, when I felt that I was pushing the limits of open circuit sidemount diving in terms of the number of cylinders I wanted to carry and dive durations, and also feeling the pressure from the rising cost of helium, I started to consider a path to closed circuit rebreather diving. I had many dive friends diving rebreathers, all of them back-mounted, and look, to be frank, I thought the units looked complicated, unwieldy, certainly not streamlined, and I watched them all struggle to some degree with trim and stability. It was the antithesis of what I was looking for and the reasons that I chose sidemount diving in the first place. So I decided if I was going to dive CCR or rebreather, it had to be a sidemount unit. No ifs, buts or maybes. In this, I chose to ignore the advice from many others in terms of diving a backmount unit before looking at sidemount rebreathers. Part of this was a certain pig-headedness on my part, but there was also a solid helping of sheer economics involved. There was no way I was going to purchase and train on a backmount unit when I knew I was going to end up diving a sidemount rebreather. I knew this because, number one, I'm exclusively a sidemount diver, and secondly, I'm able to dive the same open circuit sidemount configuration in caves, wrecks, and open water. I needed my rebreather categorically to be able to accomplish dives in all of these environments, and also to be able to take me further, deeper, and on longer dives. Backmount CCR was never going to be able to do this. So with this first decision made, the next was to find out more about the various sidemount rebreather options available, and there are quite a few. My very first conversations were with my good friends Pete Mesley and Andrew Simpson in Truck Lagoon last June. We were absolutely blessed to have Richard Harry Harris with us on the trip, and yes, as I've previously covered, this was only a matter of a few weeks before the Tive Cave rescue. Harry has a huge amount of experience with rebreathers, including sidemount units, and he was able to share some insights as to his experiences and what he dives. It was only a couple of months later that I started speaking sidemount, so I selfishly included questions on sidemount rebreathers to learn about the various units from some of the leading sidemount divers in the world. Steve Bogarts, Jill Heineth, Becky Kagan-Schott, and Edd Sorenson on the Divesoft Liberty. Gary Dallas on the SF2, Brian Kaycook, Tom Crisp and Edd Sorenson on the KISS Sidekick, Thorsten Velder or Toddy on the T-Rub, and Ed again along with Mike Thomas and Christina Zanato on the KISS Sidewinder. To be fair, some of these units, in fact all of them, are relative newcomers to the market, and some of my guests were on their own paths learning about the units they were diving. Each unit had its strong points. They all had some weaknesses. So how do I choose? And I want to be clear, my choice was just that, the best decision for me based on my research and my requirements. Your choice may be very different, and that's great. So what were my requirements? Well, if you go back to what I said earlier about the reasons that I chose Sidemount, these same factors apply to my choice of rebreather. I needed to be able to be balanced and stable in trim to the same standard that I can in open circuit, no compromise. I needed to be able to dive the rebreather in caves, including restrictions, in wrecks, again in tight spaces, and for open water decompression diving, with the eventual capability to go to hypoxic trimix depths beyond my current 65 meter limit on open circuit. I needed a unit that travels well, as much of my diving is done away from home, so size and weight was definitely a factor. I knew work of breathing can be an issue with Sidemount rebreathers, so I wanted the best work of breathing possible. I'm not particularly tall, so I was concerned about the length of the unit. An LE 80 or 11 litre was about as long as I could possibly go without feeling as though the unit was down to my knees. And if possible, I wanted to make as much use of my existing gear in terms of harness, BCD, cylinders, and regulators. So it's no secret that I chose the KISS Sidewinder, and I want to start by saying that KISS rebreathers are not a sponsor of this podcast, and this was by a long shot the biggest investment that I've ever made in dive equipment and the training. I mean, KISS certainly fit the bill in every respect, but that is nothing more than a reflection of my love of this unit and support for what KISS rebreathers do. So how does the Sidewinder fit the criteria that I set, and why was it my choice? If you haven't checked it out yet, hit pause and head over to the Sidemount Pro's YouTube channel and watch the course video from my training with Edd. Pictures, or in this case videos, speak 1,000 words. These are the highlights of many hours of video that Edd shot over 10 days of diving, and I had high expectations, but I was simply staggered at how the unit supported me to be balanced, stable, and in trim. It is true to the KISS name. It's simple, relatively easy to set up, lightweight. Work of breathing was a non-issue, and I'm using the same side mount setup that I do for open circuit with the addition of a diluent hose, nothing more. And of course the Nerd 2 is my CCR computer. Now just while I'm on the Nerd is without doubt a great addition to a CCR unit. Rebreather diving is all about knowing and managing your partial pressure of oxygen, and much as a fighter pilot uses a heads-up display to ensure that they're aware of their equipment and environment, having all of your important dive data in your eye line makes you much more aware as a diver. I absolutely loved adding it to the Sidewinder and highly recommend it. And of course, given that Edd had introduced me to the Sidewinder, I chose to cross the planet once again and train on the Sidewinder with him. It was without doubt one of my best and most challenging dive experiences. So sit back while Edd and I share more on my training on the KISS Sidewinder rebreather.
Well, Edd, normally I start Speaking Sidemount by saying welcome to Speaking Sidemount, but I'm sitting here in your living room in Marianna, Florida, so maybe we should switch the roles there and have you welcome me.
Welcome to Marianna, Florida. Glad to have you here, and it's been a great 2 weeks.
Oh, man, it's been unbelievable, and I can say hand on heart, it's been one of the best diving experiences of my life. So I've been talking about how I was looking forward to this in many of the past episodes. I have sincerely been looking forward to this for 6 months or more since we first booked this particular session. And for the listeners, I've just completed Cave DPV with Edd. I'm not going to talk too much about that in this episode. We can cover that in another one. But I've just done Sidewinder training, Sidewinder CCR, the KISS unit as well. So 5 days of training, and then Edd and I have done 5 days of diving after that. And I think that's now given me a pretty good perspective on where the Sidewinder sits in my mind, and also how it's achieving the goals that I set out to achieve. Because if you remember back listening to some of the earlier podcasts and the research that I'd done, I was really looking for something that enabled me to use my existing side mount system. I was absolutely adamant that I had to be something that I could get into trim, balance, and buoyancy control really quickly. And then I was concerned about, could I use it for the sort of dives I'm doing, cave diving, wreck diving, open water diving, and so I'm really happy. But let's start to unpack some of this. So Edd, let's see if we can put the Sidewinder in perspective against other units, because they all have their benefits. There's no perfect unit. Where does the Sidewinder sit in your mind?
Well, I'm certified on 5 side mount units. I teach on many of them. I'm an instructor trainer examiner for the Sidewinder and the side kick. But I like them all. They all have their ups and downs. They all have their pros and cons. But what I've found, for me personally, is since all I do is cave dive, and a lot of what I do is quite small.
Yeah.
Or it might be good size, medium, small, but there's going to be some small restrictions. I like to make sure that I have cave redundancy. And when I was diving the gem way back when, it enabled me to maintain my double tank side mount configuration, but it was SCR and it still had front mounted counterlungs. So after a couple of years, it really wasn't the ideal tool. Later on, the side kick came out, and then many others came after that. The side kick originally was SCR. I wasn't real happy with it, but when it went CCR, it's a great unit. It's very robust. It's near bulletproof. However, with all the side-mounted units, to be able to fit in my normal 10-inch profile, I've got one tank.
Yeah.
So it was always a balancing act of taking stages up to the restriction, and then now you're pushing a stage bottle through the restriction. If it was a bottle off restriction, you're putting a stage bottle through plus your bottle through, clipping it all back on. With the Sidewinder, I can still fit through anything the width of my chest will fit through with double tanks and the breather.
Yep.
No gear removal. Also, a lot of my students, by the time they get here, they're already experienced side mount divers, and they're already experienced cave divers wanting this tool to be able to move further into the cave and take all the time stress, gas stress, and distance stress out of the equation. As long as you have a bailout to get you from X out, you've got all day to spend up till X. But they didn't want to start over. They didn't want to feel like a new diver again. They didn't want to have to basically feel like they're no other word for it other than start over.
Yeah. Yep.
With the side-mounted units, there's a lot of really good ones. I love them all. But you have that buoyancy change. Every time you exhale, you get about 4 or 5 pounds positively buoyant. When you inhale, you get 4 or 5 pounds negatively buoyant. So they're a little bit more difficult to learn. Not bad. There's still a rumor myth going around that a side mount rebreather should never be your first rebreather. I don't know how many people I've heard say that. Mm-hmm. I have, 70, 80 students that a side mount rebreather was their first rebreather.
And another one.
And another one. And not a single one of them has ever had a difficulty making it through the class, let alone being able to cave dive just the way they were.
Yeah.
Before the end of class.
To me, I sort of don't want to say this too early in this particular episode, but what has staggered me a little bit, I expected to get through the course and I expected some challenges along the way, and we had some challenges, especially on day one. But from day two onwards, I got more and more comfortable, and it was just, hey, I've got some more things to manage. But the diving that you and I have done over the last 5 days, that is about the limit of my open circuit diving. How far back were we? 2,000 feet?
Yeah, right around 2,000, right about the limit of
my bailout, right? So we're 2,000 feet back in the cave. We're going through some really small cave. You wouldn't call it super tight restrictions that we had to grind through, but there was certainly some challenging parts. Some of it was super silty, and I would have not had too much trouble going through there in open circuit, apart from percolation, which would have been an issue, and apart from gas stress, time stress, distance stress, which we would have had on open circuit. But what staggered me is I'm only 1 week out of course, and I can go into the same place I can on open circuit and pretty much execute the same dive. And yeah, I had a bit more to manage, but I was ready for that. I was so comfortable in open circuit. I had some brain space that I could manage my PPO2 and manage my loop and so on. So that surprised me how good I got fast.
Well, I kind of knew where you wanted to go.
Mm-hmm.
You progressed nicely throughout class. Everybody that is an experienced side mount open circuit cave diver has all those little tips and tricks to control your buoyancy through your breath.
Mm-hmm.
And those are all out the window.
Exactly.
So the more experienced you are, the harder it is to get rid of those. So once you got past that, most of it in day one, the remainder in day 2 and 3, your buoyancy skills got better every day. Your understanding of the unit got better every day. We trained hard on the why behind the how on every single aspect, and I drilled it into you. By day 5, and you were done, I knew where you wanted to go. We had a week, so I wanted to do progressively easy dive with a little bit of this. A little harder dive with a little bit of, and by day 5, you were doing stuff that a lot of open circuit divers wouldn't even do in Sidemount. So, and I filmed hours and hours and hours of you. So you can't say, oh, that wasn't me.
I'm going to make a video of this as well. This is the thing. I mean, photographs sometimes lie. I say that a lot, but video doesn't lie. And yeah, we can edit it to make us look good. But at the same time, again, I'm still staggered at the time to competence. Because my feeling is generally going from open circuit diving to rebreather diving, the time to competence is reasonably significant. And to have someone come along, admittedly, I had a lot of experience and skill in the beginning, but the time to competence on this unit is just staggeringly short.
It's such a well-balanced unit. So you've got a small scrubber on each side. It's got more scrubber capability than most of the side-mounted units. Most of them are in the 5-pound sorb range. This is 6.2. So it's got a really good duration, but it's so well balanced. The small radials on top of your cans, it doesn't impede your profile in any way. You still have redundancy with your exact same configuration you had. You were diving the exact same regs, the exact same way you dove open circuit. We added one hose.
Actually, one benefit, I was actually diving smaller cylinders than I normally dive, which in terms of carting them to and from the entry made things a hell of a lot easier. So, in fact, I was able to reduce the size of my cylinders.
And so when you breathe, you didn't have that side-to-side motion that you had to overcome. So it just makes for a easier-to-learn unit. It's the most versatile. I've had people diving in. They side mount when they're in the cave. They put it on a back-mounted set of doubles when they're boat diving. You can put it with a single tank. You can, there's almost nothing you can't do with this thing. It's just, you just packed up. How light is that thing? 22 pounds, and it'll fit in a backpack.
Yeah.
So one of my former students finished up a few weeks ago. He was just traveling back home, and he said he put everything, the entire unit, in a backpack. Yeah. And he still had his carry-on, backpack over his shoulder, and away he went.
Well, I hope it works out for me. I've got a lot of travel to do now, so.
Good.
Awesome. In terms of the Sidewinder, I know there's a few myths about it, so let's see if we can discuss some of those. What do you see as some of the myths that need to be dispelled?
Well, at first, Mike gave me the project, and I was diving the Sidekick as my primary unit at the time. And it was kind of a low-profile back-mount unit, I thought, and as I developed the connection points and how we're going to attach it, I designed the backplate that would go on. I think we ended up with 3 different backplates to fit pretty much all the harnesses to make it very, very universal. So some of the myths at first were there's no moisture trap. So any water, you're going to die. So as these became more and more prominent, and most of it was from people that dove something else and don't look at that. We don't want you diving that. So as these myths became more prominent, this guy's saying enough, then it spread. So now they're all saying it. So I started flooding it intentionally. And I would put in 6 ounces of water, 8 ounces of water, 12 ounces of water, 32 ounces of water. The final dive, I had a friend of mine filming me, and I put over a half a gallon of water into the unit.
Wow.
I was still able to complete the dive. We were in a cave, which Mike wasn't real happy about, but that's where I'm at home. So the work of breathing did start to get a little tougher, but it has such an excellent work of breathing anyway that it was still not bad at all. And I got no caustic. And not only did I put that much water through it, but I was also doing somersaults and barrel rolls in the bigger parts of the cave just to make sure if it's in there, let's get it where it needs to go. Let's see what's going to happen. So we dispelled that myth, but people still continued to, oh, there's no moisture trap. Oh, there's no moisture trap. So then we made a counterlung with a water duct. But as people started diving it, then they all realized, I don't need that. So the dumpable counterlung's been out for over 2 years, and I think he sold maybe a dozen of them.
Right.
And I've trained probably over 150 students on the thing. So most people find out right away, yeah, it's not necessary. Some of the people said, let's see, I'm just trying to think of all the things I saw and read and heard. That it's cheaply made and it'll break and you can't get replacement parts. I heard that a lot. Mine is, I had the original prototype. Tom Mount has it now. I have prototype number 0002. I now have well over 4,000 hours on that. It's gone on rescues. It's gone on body recoveries. It's gone in this cave that it shouldn't have gone into. It's scratched. It's beat. It's worn looking. But I've never even replaced an O-ring, except in the DSV. When I ground through some sand one time, I had a DSV O-ring leak. So it's still got the original O-rings from way back then, 2016. So yeah, if I can't break it, it can't. It's pretty much can't be broken. Let's see, what are some of the others? I actually heard somebody that was an instructor of another unit saying they're only good for an hour.
Right.
Well, the unit they were teaching on had a 5-pound scrubber. This has a 6.2. So I'm not sure how they came up with that math, but it has 6.2 pounds in the 70-degree water. I'm diving, and that gives you about an hour to an hour and 15, hour and 30 tops per pound on a light to moderate workload. In testing, I had pushed it past 14 hours in a moderate workload swimming against Jackson Blues flow and still had no breakthrough. I was starting to get breakthrough on 408 at about 10 hours. Right. So I do things that I don't recommend other people do, but that's why Mike has me as his test person, because I am willing to push things because I know what could happen.
Well, I think that's one of the things that it's important to know where the line might live, isn't it? Is how long will your sword last?
So let's see, what are some of the others? That the way the counterlung is, so you've got then you've got a counterlung, then you've got a harness that's being held down by 2 heavy steel tanks. When Mike first gave me the project, I saw that as a problem. I said, these heavy tanks, I dive heavy steel tanks. They're going to pull that down. It's going to smash that counterlung. It's not going to breathe well. Mike said, just dive it. And I did. And I went, this has got a better work of breathing than almost everyone on the market. And I still firmly believe that. So the work of breathing is exceptional. For those people, and like we discussed in the start of class, you dive excellent regulators. You dive a high quality, expensive regulator. Yep. So you're used to being delivered gas and a lot of it because you like a quality regulator. Once you get through the initial cracking pressure, work of breathing cracking pressure, you're being force-fed gas. Now you're the machine that moves it. So that's why I explain these things at the start of class. Sure. And that's why day one, as soon as we went through our pre-breathe, I said the first 5 minutes, we're just going to be in confined water horizontal, and you're going to just breathe. So you get used to what that difference in breathing is. Then we start the skills. So those are the big ones. The work of breathing was terrible and came out. It's probably the best of all the Sidemount rigs. The water problem is not a problem. I've had other ones that have water traps that are not near as flood intolerant as this one. So we pretty much dispelled all the myths.
What about the aspect that KISS manual CCR versus ECCR, electronically driven?
Okay, so that's a good one. There's a lot of people believe what they're told because there's an old saying, you don't know what you don't know. So if somebody says you have to have an electronic rebreather, then they're going to think they have to have an electronic rebreather. That's why I like to teach the whys behind the hows. I teach electronic rebreathers and I teach manual rebreathers. This is a constant flow, so it's not a true manual where your PPO2 is going to do nothing but go down until you add oxygen. It's got a constant flow orifice, as you've seen, so it's going to deliver your metabolic rate of oxygen. So if you're not changing depth, you don't have to do anything.
Sure.
Some of my ECCRs that I dive and that I own, when I dive them manually, or even when I'm diving them electronically, your PPO2 is still going to drop until you're adding gas or the solenoids are firing. So this is actually easier to dive, I think, than all the electronic ones. The only difference is some people think that they need that babysitter, that I can't go too low because it's going to fire. Mm-hmm. It will fire dill or oxygen and bring that PPO2 up. Or I can't go too high because it's going to, once it gets past 1.3 or whatever I set my set point out, it's going to fire and bring it back down. Well, that's why in the class we talked about if you're going to run a 1 or a 1.1 or a 1.2, and I give that completely up to you. Mm-hmm. From that 1 to a 1.6 is a really long ways. And as you saw, as we did more diving in SCR, so you didn't have any oxygen flowing, how long it took to get it down to even to a 0.7 or a 0.5. It took a really long time. So to need a babysitter, now that you've done 10 days of diving, how long would you have had to not look at your PO2?
Minutes. If we're at the same depth.
A really long time.
Yeah. I mean, we check it more often than that, but for sure.
So some people that are doing, say, videography or something where they're really concentrating on their shot, well, A, they should have a safety diver anyway, making sure that their PO2 is within range. But I could see where they would feel more comfortable with an ECCR to make sure that I'm not going to go too high or I'm not going to go too low. But even with the Nerd, as you've seen, it's not intrusive. It's right there.
Well, I was going to raise that in that circumstance. And one of the things that I really, really enjoyed was I had the opportunity during the course to dive the petrol with a Fisher connection. And that was necessary because you needed to be able to see my PPO2 at all times during the course. And so that was good to have that comparison. And then at the end of the course, put the Nerd on. And I think the thing I appreciated once I had the Nerd there was just how it's right in your eye line. If it goes red, you're going to see it immediately, which is one thing. But the bottom line was that having that in your eye line is really, really valuable. I think if you've got or other aspects that you're looking at, such as film, video, photographs, and so on, I think there's some of the big advantages of the Nerd 2 in particular over having a hand-mounted unit.
And for example, when I was doing the double body recovery in the Dominican, we talked about this in one of the podcasts, where there was long stretches where I was in complete zero. And I finally, after 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes, I'd bang my computer up against my mast trying to get some water in so I could see 1/8 of an inch. And my PO2 was always plus or minus right where I wanted it to be. So if I can't see it long enough, I'm just going to go to SCR. It's not a big deal. But I could always, if I banged it around, it was so limited in visibility that eventually I could see that 1/8 of an inch, 1/16 of an inch to get what I needed. But it was always right there. I was never concerned with it at any point. So
let's just explain SCR for a moment. So for those who don't know too much about KISS rebreathers in particular, so switching to SCR, what's that all about? So since all I do is cave dive, the Mod 1 is supposed to be open water. I have waivers to make sure that my full cave divers can do it in the cavern. But we're in an overhead. Almost all my students are full cave divers, and I know that that's where they want to use the thing. So when problems arise, you run out of oxygen, anything happens, a lot of instructors just teach when in doubt, bail out. But if you're that far into a cave and you run out of oxygen or you lose your display, it's really a non-issue. Number one rule of rebreather diving is always know your PPO2, know what you're breathing. So all you got to do, if you lose your display, shut down your oxygen. Now you can breathe multiple times. And since I run primarily the same gas that I would run on open circuit, so at max depth, I'm going to have a max PO2 of 1.2. So you diluent, yeah.
I know as soon as I exhaust that lung full of gas out my nose and breathe in diluent, I'm going to be at a 1.2. And I can get at, these depths, 70 to 100 feet, I'm going to get 20 plus breaths to 1 as opposed to going to an open circuit 1 to 1. So I always have enough gas to get me out and bail out, but why would I bail off of a perfectly good functioning unit?
Yeah, that just happens to have lost a display or
which had a minor problem.
Yeah.
So that's why in my classes we do a lot of SCR, because it really gets you in tune with the machine.
Yes.
What is my PO2 doing without oxygen?
Yeah.
How many breaths does it take to get down to here? What does it come back up to? If you didn't come back up to where you needed to be, like the first couple of days,
you flush with diluent again. Yeah.
You knew you had some residual low PO2 gas left in the loop.
Yeah.
So by the time we kept doing it, and you kept seeing, oh, this is better. Oh, this is better. And you just got it, and you understood more about what the machine was doing, and you got in touch with the machine. And now, day one of after class on a guided dive, you looked really comfortable on the unit. You were calm, cool, relaxed, and we just went for a 2.5, 3 hour swim dive and had some fun. And each day we tried to do something, a little bit more to the lines of what you used to do. Yep. So we gradually worked into it, and the confidence didn't diminish from what I saw. It actually got better.
Oh, sure. And I think what helps me with that a lot, number one, yes, comfort with the unit, obviously having you there as well as comfort in itself. But the other thing was we were analysing the video each night, weren't we? So we'd go through the video, and one of the things Ed's helped me with a lot was I have good trim typically, but there's times when I need to lift my knees up, right? And you're able to point that out, and I think sometimes you need that because you can either build up bad habits or you just had them in the beginning, and it's nice to be able to say, hey, listen, you could be better if you did this. So for me, especially when we're going upwards slightly, being able to lift my knees up to make sure that I'm not finning silt has been really important. And then we put that to the test. Mm-hmm. So man, what we went through today in an amazing cave called Hole in the Wall was some relatively narrow passage, relatively tight and small, but it was super silty. How deep's that silt?
Well, Woods Hole did core samples by pushing a Lexan tube down 10 feet by hand. So they had no resistance. So who knows? But if you'd have put your finger down, you'd have disappeared to your armpit.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's dusty.
I was very pleased with how I went through there, but again, this is the staggering thing. We're now 5 days out of course. We're 20 hours on a unit, and I can go through and dive a place like that, which is beyond my expectations for sure.
Well, and I've always found that the camera on my mast, that small paralens camera sits right there. It's unobtrusive. It's easy to operate. I have hands free, so if I ever had a student have a problem, I have my hands free, but it's filming the whole thing. So as we go through class, we can see what your strong points are, what we need to work on. So I think it's just an invaluable tool to be able to get better and better and better. I mean, even when, 20 years ago when there was a guy who was just starting out in videography and he wanted to shoot Hole in the Wall back in like 2003. And he said, I want you to be up front for perspective and I'll follow you around. Well, we were building our own Sidemount rigs back then. And I thought I had this one dialed in really nicely. And we came back to watch the footage and I just screamed, ah! But if you can't see it, you don't know. Yeah. So even something that might feel good and you would do the reach around, feeling around, and everything seems good. And then when you see it on video, ooh, that could be better. What if we tighten this up? What if we bring that up? Yeah. So it's an invaluable tool for those like me that good enough is not good enough. Yeah. How can I be better tomorrow? How can I be better tomorrow? So
I've appreciated that. Your standards are very high. And certainly the first day I was under a bit of pressure, I felt. So because you were tough on that first day. And I didn't mind that, but I certainly felt the pressure of thinking, okay, I'm better than some of the things that are going on here. And also, you were pointing out valid issues that needed to be fixed. We took a little bit of time to get the new harness dialed in, the cylinders the way that we wanted them, and so on. But from then on, it really, once we got it dialed in, then it was the fine tuning, right? And I've always been someone who aspires to excellence. As you say, half good enough isn't really good enough.
Right.
If you're going to be in trim, be in trim. Right. Then what does that mean? It doesn't mean having your knees down. We've talked about that at length, right? And not necessarily referring to me all the time either. But, we need to have your knees up. You need to have your feet off the floor. You need to be able to propel in such a way that you're not creating thrust into silt. and you need to be able to make sure that you can hold your level in any amount of water. And when I say that, I mean going through a really small space that maybe only has 8 inches, or, well, not 8 inches, maybe a bit more if you're swimming, but you get the point.
By being hard, that gets us to the level we need to be sooner.
Yeah.
I have high standards. The training is, I'm hard on you during video review, but at the end of video review, all that it's about is what do we fix to make tomorrow better? Yeah. And every day you got better and better, and pretty soon you were back up to your open circuit level of excellence, now in a CCR.
Yeah.
And then by a 5-day class, we're starting out into things that you would normally be doing at your level of excellence in open circuit. Now you're on CCR, and it just got better and better, and you got more and more comfortable and more confident.
And obviously at 20 hours, you're far, far, far from the finished product. There's a lot of hours to put on that unit to become completely, because as I said before, with open circuit, everything was so instinctual and so much muscle memory that it's probably where you are in CCR now, right? It's like kind of, hey, I don't have to think about this very much. It just happens.
Right.
Whereas I'm still thinking a lot. But having said that, there's a bit more to manage. And so, as I do that more and more, and as I start to, I think the things I'm learning is how to preempt depth changes in particular and make sure that I stay ahead of the curve in terms of buoyancy control in particular and not overshoot, which is something I've been doing a little bit. But these are really, really, I won't call them minor because they're important, but they're not great issues in terms of executing dives at all.
And I've found that there's almost nothing I can't do. There was one hole on an exploration we were doing, and it was a little bit bigger than a basketball. That was when it was still in its prototype stages, and I was diving the side kick. It was a double bottle off restriction. So we would have to take the side kick and the bottle off, put it ahead of us, and even my shoulders would barely fit through once I had everything off. And I would have to wiggle and squeeze, but it's soft limestone. And as we went through more and more and more and more, well, one day I just thought, I was far enough into the prototype development that I thought, well, we could take this on a 10, 12,000 foot dive now. And by taking the bottles off, the scrubber cans dropped down because of the little bungees on the can. Yep. And I was able to fit through that double bottle off. Now, I still had to take both bottles off, but I could double bottle off, squeeze through that restriction, put them back on. So I was pretty much unlimited. The only thing you absolutely can't do without any serious practice is take the whole unit off. Right. Now, I've taken it off of people when we're doing tri dives, tanks, bottles, and all. I can do it if it's not like hole in the wall where it's just a mung floor. I just roll over on my back and I can just crawl out of the thing, pick it up, slide it through. But I wouldn't recommend that for most people. But that's really about its only limitation.
Yeah, and look, I don't know how many nines of divers are never going to want to do that or never going to need to do that, right? So no issue whatsoever. So to wrap this session up, I went through a really big research project to do this. I will have mentioned this in the opening to this podcast, and I really looked across the market. Just for the listeners who maybe are in a similar situation, I'm a side mount diver through and through. The prerequisites for me were absolutely that I needed to be able to keep as much as I can of my current setup, and I also wanted to be able to execute the sort of dives that I wanted to be able to execute, which is cave diving, wreck diving, open water diving. So I think this unit is absolutely suitable to all of those environments. And then the last thing is I really wanted this maintenance of my ability to hold trim, balance, and buoyancy. And as our listeners know, I've been critical of many back-mounted CCR divers, particularly back-mounted ones who think they're in trim, and in fact they're not. They're in a head-up, knees-down position, and I absolutely didn't want to find myself in that situation, having put so much work into being what I would call better than that. So I think ultimately you can tick all the boxes. Everything that I wanted has been achieved. Could I have done that with another unit? Quite likely. And will this be the only unit I ever dive? Probably not. So almost certainly there'll be some other units that I want to have a look at, and I'd be happy to do that. But in terms of me getting into Sidemount CCR diving, I'm over the moon.
And one thing that we didn't touch on, and that's probably a whole different set of talks, but is redundant rebreathers. Yeah. When we go deeper, longer, farther, massive amounts of bailout bottles, like our current project, we're past 15,000 feet. Yeah. So how many bottles do you need for something like that? So redundant rebreathers, dual rebreathers, there's so many ways to go. Mm-hmm. But I've found with 2 side-mounted units, you need an oxygen bottle and a dill bottle on them, which increases the profile. And they become unwieldy in certain times and areas in great depth variances, where I've been diving this with the Sidekick and with the Liberty side-mounted, and that still gives me, especially with the Liberty, it gives me 120 cubic feet of gas on my right-hand side with long hose capability and everything else. And I still have a dill bottle and an oxygen bottle separate on my Liberty. So I'm completely redundant. I've got a lot of dives in this. Brian and I, as we talked about, we're doing 10,000 foot penetrations there. And that was varying from 35 feet to 170 plus feet through grinder restrictions that we could barely squeeze through. And talk about no time stress, gas stress, or distance stress. Yeah. I was helping Brian carry multiple bottles because he was on a single rebreather. And it gives you such peace of mind that you have 2 really good, whether it's the Sidekick, the Liberty, the Flex, the Tesla, to have almost no limitations. Yep. I can do double bottle off restrictions. I can do anything my head and chest will fit through. And there's almost no limits to how far I can go. Yep. Because I've got...
So I think you mentioned at the beginning of this Sidekick and the Liberty, but you're really saying Sidewinder.
Sidewinder Liberty, yes, thank
Liberty.
You.
And I think one of the things that I noted with that when you mentioned it to me is you've got the Sidewinder and the Liberty as your redundant rebreather, but you've also got your dill slant bailout that's going to the Sidewinder, right? Mm-hmm. So you've effectively got triple redundancy. I mean, you can go either rebreather or open circuit off that dill bottle, right?
Right. So I have them both set up for offboard gas too. Mm-hmm. So if I did need to carry any, or I did need to plug into a decompression bottle or an oxygen bottle or anything like that later on, but with a good amount of open circuit bailout, plus a long hose, plus a bailout reg, plus dueling rebreathers, I mean, it's pretty much possibilities are endless. So the Sidewinder is what I found to be the best for running dual rebreathers in my experiences. So that's probably something for another day. But it's really a very, very, very versatile unit.
Awesome. Well, Ed, I don't know how long we've gone, but it's been awesome. As I said in the beginning, this has been one of the diving experiences of my life, to be honest. So I sincerely appreciate it. I've just learned shitloads, to be quite blunt. As I said, I'm thrilled with the competence I've been able to achieve, which is a testament to you in terms of your training. One thing I did love, apart from, you were tough and you had standards, et cetera, but there was tons of swimming time. So there was lots and lots of time where we could just swim around and learn how to manage that unit. So that was awesome. That was certainly contributory to where we ended up. Thanks very much.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure and a great 2 weeks of diving.
Hey, thanks a lot for listening to this episode. I really hope you got a lot from it and that you learned a little bit more about side mount rebreathers and in particular the KISS Sidewinder. I absolutely, again, want to thank Edd Sorenson for the amazing training experience that he took me through, including the diving that we did afterwards. We also want to thank KISS Rebreathers for just producing a staggeringly good unit. And also, of course, my sponsors, X-Deep and Shearwater Research for their support, which goes a long, long way to making this podcast possible. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you again in the next episode.
You've been listening to Speaking Sidemount from www.sidemountpros.com. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and consider leaving us a 5-star review. If there's something you'd like us to cover on the show, then let us know via our Facebook page listed in the podcast notes. Thanks again, and we look forward to you joining us on our next episode of Speaking Sidemount.